Okay, so this is part 2 of solving quads. In today's lesson, what we're going to do is solve by the square root method, where we want to isolate the x squared term, so we want to get x squared alone. Much like when you're solving for x, you want to get x alone, you want to get the squared term by itself. So we're going to go through a couple examples here. Number 1 says solve 3x squared. So like we just talked about, x squared we want to get alone. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So on the left I have x squared equals 9. So now since I have the x squared term alone, now I can square root both sides to undo the x. So remember that when you square root a number, you get two answers, a positive and a negative. So you should have two answers for these, positive 3 and negative 3. Now what happens when we have parentheses that are squared? Same idea. Let's go ahead and treat this like 4x squared plus 1 equals 145. So what we're going to do here is we're going to subtract 1 and divide by 4. Okay, so now we've got x squared equal 36, but remember we replace the x squared with the x minus 2. So now instead of x squared, we're going to write x minus 2. So now from here, we're going to go ahead and square root both sides. And go x minus 2, remember, equals 6, and x minus 2 equals negative 6. And we're going to solve both problems here. So adding 2 to both sides, x is going to equal 8, and x will equal negative 4. So there are your two answers, negative 4 and 8. Now, you don't have to change this term here every time to x squared and then put it back in. You can solve just like you normally would. So I'll take you through that real quick off to the side here in blue. So if you don't want to know, go ahead and fast forward through this. So 4x minus 2 squared plus 1 equals 145. So again, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. Divide by 4. Take the square root. So x still equals 8 and x equals, whoops, screwed that one up, negative 4. So there are your two answers. And the last part of this objective is solving by the quadratic formula. Remember, you only use this when nothing else works. So when you can't solve by factoring and you can't solve by the square root method, resort to this just because it just gets a little tricky with the simplifying, the radicals, and you don't want to have to do this every single time. So remember that you have to get it equal to 0 like the factoring method. So in number 3, we're already equal to 0. The number in front of the x squared term is 1, so that's going to be our a. So a equals 1. B is the number in front of the x, and that's negative 4. And c is the number at the end. So now I'm going to follow the equation. X equals the opposite of e, so negative 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times a times c. So again, notice whatever I'm substituting, I'm putting in parentheses. And you're going to divide this all by 2 times 1. Okay, if I'm going to go ahead and simplify this, let's go negative 4 is going to be positive 4, plus or minus the square root. 4 squared is 16, minus 4 times 1 times 2 is 8 over 2. And now simplifying the square root, I'm going to have 4 plus or minus 8 over 2. And then remember, 8 can be broken down into 4 and 2, 2 and 2. So that means a 2 will come out. This 2 is at home, so you got 4 plus or minus 2 radical 2 over 2. Now since these terms out of the radicals are even, they're all divisible by 2. So this becomes a 2, that becomes a 1, and this becomes a 1. So what you have left here is 2 plus or minus root 2. You could say over 1, or you can just leave it like this. So what I want you to realize is that you really have two answers. Remember, this equals x. So x could equal 2 plus root 2, or x could equal 2 minus root 2. So either one of those would be your answer. Okay, let's take a look at one more. When a is not 1, we want to get it equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. So 2x squared plus 5x minus 4 equals 0. And it just helps to write out what a is, and b, and then finally c. So now again, we're going to use a quadratic formula and say x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. So I'm going to go ahead and simplify. Negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25. Now negative 4 times 2 times negative 4 is going to be a positive 32, all over 4. We got x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 57 over 4. And I'm going to see if I can break 57 down. Oh, let's see, it's divisible by 3 and 19. Nope, that is the only thing. So 57, you can't reduce anything. So you're going to be left with x equals negative 5 plus root 57 over 4, and x equals negative 5 minus root 57 all over 4. Okay, so that's how you work the quadratic formula. Go ahead and try those. So solving by undoing and then solving by the quadratic formula. So go ahead and practice those.